Imagine a man who had everything, yet owned nothing. Alexander Vance, Atlanta's highest-paid CEO, lived in a glass bubble, immune to feelings, until fate blew out his tire on a dark street his corporate maps never showed. As the paralyzed limousine dripped fluid onto the asphalt, his perfect life began to leak out along with it. Outside the bulletproof window, a world he only knew through risk reports moved with a human vibrancy his heart had long forgotten. This is not just a story about a flat tire. It's about a wounded soul, about to undergo the most extraordinary transformation a human being can experience. The paradox is cruelly beautiful. The man who controlled billions couldn't fix a simple car. The executive who signed million-dollar checks would discover that some things are priceless, like the genuine compassion of a stranger offering help without expecting anything in return. Prepare yourself for an emotional journey that will challenge everything you believe about success and failure. Alexander was about to discover that sometimes we need to lose control to find our true purpose, and that the greatest treasures are not in vaults, but in the human connections we make when our armor finally cracks. What would you do if everything you've built suddenly meant nothing? The answer is about to change not only Alexander's life, but the way you see your own place in the world. The sun rose over Atlanta, painting the sky gold and pink, but Alexander Vance didn't notice. Trapped in his limousine, he devoured quarterly reports on his tablet, each number an anchor that kept him tethered to the bottom of the sea of his responsibilities. He dreamed of building a legacy that would resonate through generations, something that would make his name remembered for more than just figures on a balance sheet. But the ghost of failure was a constant whisper in his ear, a fear that prevented him from deviating an inch from the path already trodden. His life was a succession of meetings in airtight rooms, calculated handshakes, and decisions that affected thousands, but whose faces he never saw. The penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park was more of a luxurious hotel suite than a home. The city lights below seemed like stars he couldn't touch. The hope of one day meaning something more than the CEO was a small, hot coal in the pit of his chest, stifled by the layers of concrete and steel of his world. He commanded a retail empire, a well-oiled machine of efficiency and profit. His words were orders, his emails, decrees. But on rare occasions, when he met the tired gaze of an intern at the end of the day, or saw the building security guard with a photo of his children on his desk, a pang of something strange, was it compassion, would prick his armor. He would quickly stifle it, attributing it to tiredness or indigestion. Alexander was, for all intents and purposes, a success. But in the quiet of the early morning, when the numbers were already dancing behind his closed eyelids, he wondered if that was the only definition of success that existed. Transformation was a concept for business books, not for his real life. And so he went on with another day, completely ignoring the miracle of the new day that was beginning outside, ready to reinforce the walls of his gilded cage. The annual Innovation Gala was the event of the year, and Alexander was at the center of it all, a king on his crystal throne amidst champagne. It was then that a young woman, her eyes gleaming with a conviction he had long since lost, crossed the room and confronted him. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice firm, "while Vance Corp rakes in millions, entire communities in New Orleans are still struggling to recover from the evictions your stores caused." The smile froze on Alexander's face. This wasn't an attack on his company. It was an attack on his own warped sense of justice. The night ended on a bitter note. In the limousine on the way to the airport, under a now black sky, Alexander's world literally shattered. A sharp bang, a violent jolt. The front tire had blown out, forcing the driver to pull over onto a dark, unfamiliar street on the outskirts of Chicago. The vulnerability was a physical shock. There he was, the most powerful man in any room, powerless in an unmoving, armored cocoon. Fate had played a cruel trick on him. While the driver tried, in vain, to file an insurance claim, figures began to emerge from the shadows. They were residents of the neighborhood, a place that Alexander's maps ignored. An older man, named Samuel, approached with a flashlight. "Need a hand, boss?" he offered, his voice gruff but not hostile. Alexander hesitated, every instinct screaming to lock the doors and call a helicopter. The temptation to flee that place was a siren song in his mind. But something in Samuel's gaze, a dignity that didn't match the scene, made Alexander lower the window. For the first time that night, he wasn't being treated like a CEO, but like a man with a problem his money couldn't solve instantly. That simple act of accepting help, so small, was the first real crack in his facade. The turning point wouldn't be a grand event, but it would begin there, on that uneven asphalt, under the curious gaze of strangers. Inside Samuel's makeshift workshop, an open garage filled with scrap metal and parts, Alexander's world crumbled piece by piece. When he tried to pay Samuel up front for his help, pulling out a tip equivalent to months of the man's rent, Samuel simply recoiled, his face hardened. "Here, sir, some things are priceless," he said calmly. The rejection was a punch to Alexander's gut, a silent humiliation that his credit card couldn't cancel out. Who was he without those pieces of plastic? The rain began to fall, turning the dirt roads into mud, and it became clear that they wouldn't be leaving that night. Samuel offered his backyard for Alexander to sleep in, a shack attached to the garage, with a thin mattress and a smell of mold and gasoline. Sleeping there was agony. Every noise in the street made him jump. The night's cold penetrated his bones, accustomed to central heating. He felt, in his own skin, the icy insecurity of someone who has nothing to lose. It was the complete opposite of his controlled world. While trying in vain to find a comfortable position on the mattress, Alexander heard the low voices of Samuel and his grandchildren in the main house. There was laughter, even in adversity. There was a sense of community, of unity, that his solitary life at the top had never allowed. The conflict was no longer with Samuel or with the favela. It was a civil war within his own soul. On one side, the CEO who saw everything as a transaction and a risk. On the other, a glimpse of the man he could be, a man who understood that true wealth might not fit into a bank statement. The challenge Alexander faced wasn't about fixing the limousine, but about fixing himself. He was trapped not by geography, but by his own mindset. And in that uncomfortable darkness, surrounded by unfamiliar sounds and smells, Alexander Vance's armor slowly began to crack, releasing the confused and frightened man who had always been inside. The fear of failure now had a new meaning, the failure of never having tried to be something more. Dawn broke over Chicago, and with the dim light filtering through the cracks in the shack, Alexander saw the world with new eyes. He saw Samuel sharing a simple coffee with his grandchildren, a scene of profound compassion and unity that no board meeting could ever replicate. The hope he thought he had lost sprouted in his chest like a flower on the asphalt. He realized, with a silent shock, that true wealth lay there, in those authentic relationships, in the resilience of that community. He then decided to do something he hadn't done in years. Listen. He sat on an overturned drum and, instead of giving orders, asked questions. He asked Samuel about his life, about the challenges of the neighborhood, about his dreams, and for the first time, Alexander wasn't listening to find a way to profit. He was listening to learn. Each story was a blow to his bubble of privilege, a slow and painful but necessary transformation. It was then that a child, Samuel's youngest granddaughter, approached him and, without ceremony, placed a rusty tin toy in his lap. He's sad. "Can you fix him?" she asked, with absolute faith in his ability. At that moment, his entire facade crumbled. The powerful CEO who commanded an empire was brought down by the simple courage and trust of a child. The tears finally came. They were tears of redemption, of repentance, of a weight that was beginning to be washed away. Alexander looked at his empty hands, which had always held contracts and smartphones, and now held a small broken toy. He realized he had spent his whole life trying to fix numbers, but had never tried to fix anything that truly mattered. The turning point wasn't the repaired tire, but his soul. He was no longer the man who had arrived there the night before. Fate had placed him there for a reason, and he was finally ready to understand what it was. Back in his world in Atlanta, Alexander's world was the same, but he was unrecognizable. At the first board meeting, he didn't present the usual profit charts. Instead, he showed photos of Samuel's community and proposed a bold social investment project, a plan to generate real justice and opportunity. The room fell silent. He saw skepticism in the eyes of some, but also a glint of agreement in others, his unlikely allies. Overcoming his fear of failure was his greatest victory. When powerful shareholders rose up against him, threatening to sell their shares, Alexander did not back down. He defended his new vision with a passion that came from experience, not a report. "It's no longer just about profit," he said, his voice firm. "It's about purpose. And today, I choose to defend that purpose, even if it means losing my seat." He was willing to sacrifice everything for his redemption. And then, the miracle happened. The story of his transformation, of the CEO who had a flat tire and found his humanity, leaked to the media. The repercussion was immense. New clients, inspired by his courage, flocked to the company. The same shareholders who had threatened him, now seeing not only a moral but also a financial return, backed down. He had proven, against all odds, that profit and purpose could, and should, go hand in hand. Alexander Vance was no longer a prisoner. His self-esteem no longer stemmed from his position, but from the impact he saw in the eyes of the people his company now helped. He had reconnected not only with his family, sharing his journey of transformation, but with his own humanity. His story became a beacon, inspiring other leaders to rethink their destiny. He had finally understood that true legacy is not what you accumulate, but what you leave behind for others. Alexander's visits to Samuel's community in Chicago became regular. He no longer went in a limousine, but drove a simple car, and he went not as a benefactor, but as a friend, a partner. He closely followed the projects, not from an air-conditioned room, but on the ground, getting his hands dirty. Each smile, each story of improved life, was a brick in the new legacy he was building, a legacy of tangible hope. He learned the art of listening, not as a tactic, but as a way of life. In meetings, he gave space to younger and more diverse voices, seeking compassion and understanding in every decision. His leadership was no longer feared, but admired and respected. He had traded the gilded cage of isolated power for the freedom of genuine connection, discovering that true wealth lay in the ability to make a difference. His company, once a symbol of impersonal capitalism, became a case study in corporate transformation. They reconciled profit with purpose, showing the world that social justice and business success were not enemies. Alexander saw this not as a personal triumph, but as a collective moral victory, proof of the power of overcoming adversity and the courage to reinvent oneself. At home, the lights of Atlanta no longer seemed like unreachable stars, but rather a testament to the world he was helping to change. He had forgiven himself for his years of blindness, understanding that that path was necessary to get where he was. The man who once ignored the sunrise was now grateful for each new day, each new opportunity to build a more just and equal future. His story was, above all, an invitation for everyone to step outside their own bubbles. Inside Vance Corp, the change wasn't immediate. Alexander's speech to the boardroom echoed through previously silent hallways. Sarah Jenkins, a young analyst in the support department, was the first to knock on his door. "Mr. Vance," she said, holding up a report that had been ignored for years. "I always believed we could do more." Her eyes shone with the same hope he had felt in Chicago. He wasn't as alone as he thought. The operations chief, Robert Bob Miller, a pragmatic 60-year-old, was the biggest skeptic. He saw the new ideas as an unnecessary risk. But Alexander, instead of imposing his vision, invited Bob to accompany him on a visit to the project in New Orleans. He wanted Bob to see not just the numbers, but the faces. It was a journey they both needed to take. In New Orleans, Bob witnessed the opening of a community center funded by Vance Corp. He saw children learning, people getting their first jobs. He saw real impact. While talking to a former unemployed man, now a proud supervisor of the project, Bob's hardened face softened. He didn't say much on the way back, but a week later, he placed on Alexander's desk a logistical efficiency plan that would save millions by directing some of those resources to expanding social projects. It was the most powerful conversion Alexander could witness. These early allies became the cornerstones of his transformation within the company. They were proof that change wasn't a solitary folly, but a seed that, once planted in fertile ground, could flourish even in the most unlikely places. Alexander's redemption was no longer just his own. It was becoming collective. Resistance, however, was inevitable. Jonathan Pierce, a majority shareholder with a short-sighted and razor-sharp vision, called an emergency meeting. "Alexander, you're diverting the company from its mission to generate profit," he declared, his voice a cutting ice. "This social experiment ends now. We cut these projects or I'll mobilize the board to remove them." It was the moment of truth. The temptation to give in, to return to the safety of the familiar, was a powerful whisper in Alexander's mind. He could feel the fear of failure, now amplified, hanging over him. For one night, he doubted everything. Was he throwing away everything he had built for a naive dream? He looked at a photo that was on the table now. Him, Samuel, and his granddaughter, all smiling. That smile was his new definition of success. On the day of the crucial board meeting, Alexander entered the room not with a prepared speech, but with a story. He told of the flat tire, the shack, the tin toy. He spoke of compassion, of community, and of how Vance Corp had a unique opportunity to lead a revolution in the business world. The greatest risk we can take, he concluded, looking each one in the eye, is to risk nothing. It's to remain part of the problem. The vote was close. When the chairman announced the result, in favor of maintaining Alexander's projects by a narrow margin, it wasn't an overwhelming victory, but it was a moral one. He hadn't convinced everyone, but he had defended his position. Jonathan Pierce left the room, but 3 other shareholders stayed to talk. The seed of doubt had been planted in them as well. A year later, Vance Corp was unrecognizable. The headlines no longer spoke only of its record profits, which, to the surprise of many, had grown, but of its measurable social impact. Alexander was on the cover of a major magazine under the title, "The CEO Who Rediscovered the Soul of Capitalism." He read it with a calm smile, without arrogance. The journey had been about that, about reconnecting with his own soul. His relationship with his family transformed profoundly. His teenage daughter, who had previously seen him as a distant workaholic, now looked at him with admiration. "Dad, I'm doing a school project on companies with a conscience. Can I interview you?" she asked one night. That simple question was worth more than any headline. It was redemption in its most personal and sweetest form. Alexander was in his apartment, gazing at the Atlanta night sky. The city lights no longer seemed to compete with the stars, but coexisted with them. He remembered the cold of the shack, the fear, the vulnerability, and he was grateful for every second. That hadn't been a detour in his life. It had been destiny placing him on the right path. He knew the work would never be finished. There would always be new challenges, new skeptics. But he had learned that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. The broken-down limousine on that dark street was, in the end, the vehicle that brought him closer to home than he had ever been. And his story was now an invitation for everyone to look at their own limousines. What prevented them from seeing the beauty and necessity of the world right outside? In the days following his return, Alexander's impersonal routine had never seemed so hollow. While signing documents for a multi-million-dollar merger, his mind wandered to the shared coffee shop in Samuel's garage. The simple hope of those people contrasted violently with the empty complexity of their business dealings. He began to question whether each acquisition was a legacy or just another number on a spreadsheet. He decided to do something radical. He called his assistant and canceled all the afternoon meetings. Instead, he requested the company's social responsibility reports, which he had previously only processed. Reading about the evictions in New Orleans, a knot of guilt tightened in his stomach. The activist at the gala wasn't a radical. He was a spokesperson for a truth he had chosen to ignore. His daughter Lily called to talk about a school play. Before, he would have interrupted her with a "Dad's busy, honey." This time he listened. He heard the excitement in her voice about her role as a wise tree. And suddenly, he understood. He wasn't being a strong trunk for anyone. He was just a dry branch, about to break. The transformation began with these small moments of attention. At the end of the day, looking at the Atlanta skyline, the city seemed like a collection of golden cages. He was the highest-paid prisoner of them all. The seed of doubt about his purpose, planted by Samuel's humility and watered by his daughter's sincerity, began to sprout, cracking the hard soil of his ego. Comfort no longer brought solace. The opportunity to confront his new reality came unexpectedly. Jonathan Pierce, the fiercest shareholder, arranged a lunch. "We need to talk about this ideological deviation, Alexander," the terse message read. It was a trap, an ultimatum disguised as a meal. The old fear whispered for him to give in, but the new spark of courage whispered louder. In the fancy restaurant, Jonathan got straight to the point. "Cut those charity projects. They're a cancer on our profit margin." Alexander looked at the fine porcelain plate, remembering the bitter coffee in Samuel's metal cup. Two irreconcilable worlds clashed at that table. Justice for one was detrimental to the other. Instead of reacting with anger, Alexander did something that surprised even himself. He looked Jonathan in the eye and said calmly, "Jonathan, I invite you to come with me to New Orleans next week. Come and see for yourself. Then we'll decide." The surprise on the shareholder's face was evident. It was a move of compassion, not force. The invitation wasn't about winning an argument. It was about sharing an experience. Alexander realized he couldn't explain the sunset to a man who had spent his entire life in a dark room. He had to take him outside. The turning point wasn't in defeating Jonathan, but in trying to save him from the same blindness that had afflicted him for so long. The trip to New Orleans with Jonathan was tense and silent. The shareholder observed everything with a wary skepticism. Alexander felt the weight of that journey. All his credibility was at stake. If this failed, his time as CEO would be over. It was the biggest risk of his career, but also his only chance for true redemption. They arrived at the community center on a busy day. Children were running around, people were learning new skills. Alexander saw Jonathan being approached by a young man who proudly explained how a Vance Corp skills training course had given him a job and hope for his family. Jonathan's face didn't change, but he listened. He really listened. On the way back to the airport, the silence in the car was different, less hostile, more thoughtful. Jonathan looked out the window and said, without turning to Alexander, "My daughter asked me the other day what our company does to make the world a better place." I didn't know how to answer. The simple sentence echoed in the limousine like thunder. It was the first crack in his armor. Alexander did not celebrate. He understood that the harvest of the courage he had sown was not about defeating opponents, but about planting the same seed of doubt in them. The transformation was a slow and silent contagion, and at that moment, he knew that, regardless of the outcome of the next council meeting, he had already won. He had remained true to the man he had become. News of Alexander's new directives leaked, and the corporate ecosystem reacted like a body rejecting a transplanted organ. Long-serving board members, led by CFO Eleanor Shaw, scheduled a business talk. The meeting was a coordinated attack, disguised as concern. "Alex, the stock price is stagnating. Analysts are nervous about this new direction," Eleanor said, her voice like velvet over a blade. The pressure to backtrack was palpable, a direct test of her courage. He felt panic rising, the old instinct to please, to give in to keep the peace. It was the fear of failure, now dressed in the expensive suit of his colleagues. They presented charts and projections, a siege of data designed to stifle his newfound intuition. For a moment he doubted. Perhaps he was indeed being naive, leading the company to an abyss with his foolish idealism. But then he remembered Samuel's look when he refused his money. He remembered the priceless dignity. He took a deep breath, and instead of defending himself with numbers, asked a simple question. "Eleanor, how many generations does a family have to live in poverty for our quarterly profits to be worthwhile?" The question echoed in the silent room, disarming purely financial logic. He hadn't won the battle, but he had planted a seed of dissonance. Resistance was the symptom of an illness he was determined to cure. The transformation wouldn't be a walk in the park. It would be a painful excavation into the rotten foundations of a system, and Alexander was ready to get his hands dirty. To his surprise, it was Eleanor Shaw who appeared in his office at the end of the day, away from the eyes of the rest of the board. "That question was unfair, Alexander," she began, but her voice was no longer confrontational. It was exhausted, but it haunted me all afternoon. She confessed that secretly, she mentored young people from disadvantaged communities. It was a side of her that she hid for fear of appearing weak. At that moment, Alexander saw not an adversary, but a potential ally. He had found an unexpected bridge. He shared with her his experience in the favela, his vulnerability, his emotional journey. He spoke not as a CEO to a subordinate, but as one human being to another. Authenticity had broken down the professional barrier. Together, in a single night, they sketched out a different proposal. Instead of a drastic cut in profits, a transition plan, an impact investment fund, where part of the profits would be reinvested in social projects that, in the medium term, could also generate returns. It was a hybrid solution, a bridge between two worlds that seemed irreconcilable. It was a fragile solution, a compromise, but it was a start. Alexander realized that real change rarely happens through bloody revolutions, but through slow, negotiated advances. He had turned his greatest critic into a secret accomplice. Hope now had a face and an ally within the enemy's stronghold. The alliance with Eleanor, however, came at a cost. Jonathan Pierce discovered the draft of the transition plan and saw it as a betrayal. He launched a public attack through the media, calling Alexander a sentimental incompetent and threatening a proxy war at the next board meeting. The external pressure became a hurricane, shaking investor confidence. The share price did indeed fall. For the first time, Alexander faced the real possibility of being fired. The fear was paralyzing. He looked at his family back home, at the comfortable life he had built. and questioned whether it was worth risking everything. The temptation to issue a statement backing down, to sacrifice Eleanor to save himself, was a whispering demon in his ear. It was his wife, Clara, who supported him. Seeing him distressed, she told him, "For years, I've had a rich husband and a poor man at home. Now, finally, I have a man." "Don't go back to being the rich one, Alexander." Those words were a punch of love and courage. She preferred an authentic, broke husband to a successful stranger. He realized that the real price wasn't losing his job, but losing himself again. Authenticity had a cost, but hypocrisy had a higher cost: the soul. The next morning, he sent an email to the entire board, taking full responsibility for the plan and the stock market crash. He wouldn't hide. He chose his truth. Alexander's public decision not to back down created an earthquake within the company. The email he sent to the board leaked, as he knew it would. Instead of causing panic, a curious thing happened. Employees at all levels began sending messages of support. They saw for the first time a leader being authentic and taking a risk for a greater purpose. The courage was contagious. Sarah, an analyst in the support department, organized an informal petition of support signed by hundreds of employees. They weren't just advocating for a project, but a new culture. A senior engineer, a man Alexander barely knew, stopped him in the hallway and whispered, "Thank you for trying, Mr. Vance. My niece lives in one of those neighborhoods. This matters." Hope had deep roots. The media, which initially echoed Jonathan's attack, began to shift its tone. Articles emerged about the new conscious capitalism and the CEO who put people above profit. The story of Alexander's journey, from the flat tire to his decision not to give in, resonated with the public. The company paradoxically began to gain an intangible value: respect. Alexander saw this and understood that it was no longer just about him. He had triggered a ripple effect. His personal transformation was inspiring a collective transformation. He wasn't just building a legacy of social projects, but a legacy of integrity. And he realized that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop trying to control everything and simply trust in the goodness that exists in people. Tensions reached their peak when Jonathan Pierce demanded a face-to-face meeting in Alexander's office. The atmosphere was charged, a clash of titans about to begin. Jonathan entered, his face a mask of coldness. "You've broken the board's trust, Alexander. Your position is untenable," he declared, throwing a folder of market analyses onto the table. Alexander, however, did not rise to confront him. Instead, he offered Jonathan a chair and a coffee. He remembered Samuel's lessons. True strength lies not in arrogance, but in serenity. "Jonathan," he began, "I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to understand you. What are you truly afraid of losing?" The question, posed out of genuine curiosity rather than defiance, caught Jonathan off guard. The shareholder's hardened face wavered. He expected a warrior. He found a peacemaker. He expected fear. He found empathy. He began to talk about the pressure from investment funds, about his own legacy, about the fear of being remembered as the man who allowed Vance Corp to sink. It was the encounter Alexander needed to have. He saw that Jonathan wasn't a villain, but a man trapped in his own cage, a cage made of Wall Street expectations and fear of irrelevance. They weren't so different. The conversation didn't resolve their conflicts, but it transformed an enemy into a human being. And sometimes, that's the first step towards any redemption. Despite human understanding, the business impasse remained. Jonathan could not, or would not, back down without a clear victory. He presented a final ultimatum. Alexander had to publicly abandon the transition plan and fire Eleanor Shaw, or Jonathan would mobilize the board for a vote of dismissal the following week. It was the moment of truth, the choice between power and principle. Alexander spent the night awake, pacing back and forth in his apartment. He looked at photos of his family, at the view of the city he had fought so hard to achieve. He weighed the price of losing it all, but then he remembered the cold of the shack, the tin toy, the hopeful eyes of the children in New Orleans. To lose that would be to lose his own soul. The following morning, he called a meeting with Jonathan and the keyboard members. His hands were cold, but his voice was firm. "I will not fire Eleanor Shaw, and I will not abandon our commitment to these communities," he declared. "If the board believes my vision is incompatible with the future of Vance Corp, then I will not fight the vote." He was willing to fall for what he believed in. It was a monumental sacrifice. He was voluntarily choosing the possibility of professional failure to maintain the success of his character. As he left the room, he didn't feel the agony he expected. but a profound peace. He had finally freed himself from the need to please, from the craving for approval. He was entirely in control of himself. The transformation was complete. He was free. The silence that followed his statement was the longest and heaviest of his life. Alexander already pictured himself mentally vacating his office. But then, something unexpected happened. Robert Bob Miller, the head of operations, the converted skeptic, rose slowly. "If that's the case," he said, his deep voice echoing in the room, "then my resignation is on the table along with Alexander's." It was an act of loyalty that no one, least of all Alexander, had expected. Like a domino effect, Eleanor Shaw rose, and mine too. And then, one by one, 3 other council members, those who had been silent until then, declared their support. Alexander's courage had inspired a silent revolution. They were not defending just one man, but a principle. The room, once dominated by Jonathan, was now against him. Jonathan Pierce looked around, realizing he had completely underestimated the tide of change. His power had evaporated in that moment. Without a word, he gathered his papers and left the room. Victory had not come from a single act of force, but from a collective display of integrity. The miracle Alexander had dared not hope for had occurred. Alexander looked at the faces of those who remained, their eyes brimming with tears. They were no longer just colleagues or subordinates. They were companions in the same cause. The company would not be saved by a single man, but by a culture he had helped to cultivate. The legacy would not be his, it would be theirs, and that was infinitely more valuable. With the board now unified under a new vision, Vance Corp embarked on its boldest undertaking. The transition plan was implemented not as an experiment, but as the new backbone of the company. They weren't abandoning profit, but redefining their purpose. The first quarterly report that blended solid financial results with social impact metrics was a milestone, tangible proof that ethics and profitability could coexist. Alexander paid Samuel a visit in Chicago, this time not as a lost man, but as a partner. He showed Samuel the reports, not the profit spreadsheets, but the numbers of lives impacted. The older man smiled, that same wise and tranquil smile. "I always knew you were more than that suit, my son," he said. It was the blessing Alexander didn't even know he needed. His personal life blossomed in colors he never imagined possible. He was there for family dinners, for Lily's school plays, for simple late afternoons with Clara. The connection he had sought in boardrooms was always waiting for him at home. He had discovered that balance was not a myth, but a daily choice. Alexander Vance's journey was far from over, but the path was now illuminated. He had understood that true leadership is not about commanding, but about serving. It's not about accumulating, but about contributing. And his story, which began with a flat tire on a dark street, became a beacon, an invitation for all of us to question, what are we willing to lose our throne for? Years later, Alexander was no longer the CEO of Vance Corp. He had become the chairman of a global impact investment fund, training a new generation of leaders. His story was studied in business classrooms, not as an isolated case, but as a viable model. The man who once feared failure was now the definition of meaningful success. In one of these lectures, a young student asked a question. "Mr. Vance, what would you say was the most important moment in your transformation?" Alexander thought for a moment and then smiled. "It was the moment I realized I didn't need to be a hero," he replied. "I just needed to be human. The courage to be vulnerable, to admit I was wrong, is what opened all the other doors." He regularly visited Samuel's community, which was now a thriving center of social innovation, with local businesses flourishing with the support of the former Vance Corp. Samuel was no longer there, but his grandson, now a young entrepreneur, greeted Alexander like an uncle. The cycle of compassion and opportunity had closed, perpetuating itself. Looking back, Alexander didn't see a linear trajectory, but a tapestry of encounters, difficult choices, and unexpected grace. He had understood that destiny is not a straight road we follow, but a garden we cultivate with our daily actions. His story was a testament to the fact that none of us are lost forever, and that sometimes a flat tire can be the beginning of a soul's ascent. Alexander created a foundation whose main project was a mentorship program connecting promising young people from disadvantaged communities with business leaders. He didn't measure success by financial return, but by the sparkle in a young person's eyes when they got their first job. Each story of overcoming adversity was a new chapter in his own legacy, living proof that hope is the best investment. he traveled the country, not in limousines, but on commercial flights, telling his story. His speeches weren't about business formulas, but about humanity. The world doesn't need more billionaires, he said. It needs more healers, people who care for others, for businesses, for the planet. His message was an antidote to the cynicism that dominated the corporate world. At one of these events, he reunited with the activist who had confronted him at the gala years before. The man, named David, was now his partner on several projects. Who would have thought, huh? David said with a smile. From that confrontation onward, Alexander completed the sentence. It's been a journey of redemption. The former antagonist was now an ally, proving that bridges can be built where there were only abysses before. Gradually, Alexander realized that his transformation was not a final destination, but a continuous cycle. Every life he touched his own, teaching him something new. He had become a channel for change, and in that flow, he found a peace that power and money could never buy. True wealth lay in the ability to be a seedbed of hope. On a quiet weekend, Alexander took his simple car and drove to Samuel's old workshop in Chicago. The place was now a vibrant community center, but he went to the back where the shack was still preserved as a memorial. He sat on the same overturned drum and remained silent. The gratitude he felt was overwhelming, an ocean of peace that washed away any trace of regret. A boy, the grandson of one of Samuel's friends, approached curiously. "Are you the rich man who slept here?" he asked. Alexander smiled. "No, son. That night I was a very poor man. This is where I began to become rich." The wealth he spoke of was incomprehensible to the child, but the sincerity in his eyes was. He helped the community in a small urban garden that afternoon, getting his hands dirty with soil. There were no cameras, no spotlights. He was just a man, working with other people. In that simple act, insignificant to the world, he found the fulfillment he had always sought. It was a reunion with his essence, a reminder that life is made of simple moments and hands willing to work together. As he left, he looked at the shack one last time. It was no longer a symbol of poverty or discomfort, but a sanctuary of his rebirth. He understood that he had never needed to leave his comfort zone. What he needed was to find a zone with more heart, and that place would forever hold his. On the 5th anniversary of his departure from Vance Corp., Alexander received an unexpected call. It was Jonathan Pierce. The former shareholder's voice was different, softer. "Alexander," he began hesitantly, "I'm calling to thank you." Jonathan explained that after leaving the company, he had begun his own journey of reflection. He now dedicated part of his time to advising small businesses in underprivileged communities. The seed that Alexander had planted against all odds had sprouted. Alexander hung up the phone with a smile that lingered on his face for hours. It wasn't a smile of victory, but of fulfillment. The circle was closed. His greatest opponent had been touched by the same transformation. This proved that no one is beyond redemption, and that change is a silent and powerful contagion. Sitting on his porch beside Clara, watching the sunset, he took her hand. "It's been a good life, hasn't it?" she whispered. He thought of all the battles, the falls, the twists and turns, the tears and the laughter. "It wasn't just good, darling," he replied, his voice heavy with emotion. It was meaningful. He envisioned a future where corporations wouldn't be insatiable monsters, but gardeners of society, a world where success would be measured by collective well-being. And he knew, with a certainty that came from the depths of his soul, that his story was only a small part of this great miracle to come. Hope, after all, was the greatest legacy of all. Alexander's story shows us that we don't need to break down on the side of the road to wake up to life. A simple question is enough. What really matters at the end of the day? The size of your bank balance or the impact of your actions on the lives of those around you? How many opportunities for genuine connection have you missed behind the windows of your car, whether it's a limousine or not? How many Samuels are there in your life, offering lessons in humanity that you're too busy to notice? Transformation doesn't require drama. It only requires the courage to look beyond your own navel. What if today was your flat tire day? What if life gave you the chance to rebuild everything from scratch? What would you keep and what would you throw away? Alexander's journey is a mirror. It challenges us to examine our own priorities before fate forces us to do so. The true legacy is not what we leave behind, but what we plant in people's hearts. This isn't just the story of a CEO. It's a call to action for all of us, an invitation to step outside our bubbles and rediscover that true wealth lies in the hands we extend, not the ones we close. How about starting today? How about being the change you want to see in the world? If this journey touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because stories that inspire true transformation deserve to be shared, and your own turnaround may be just beginning.